Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding out that scientists just cracked the code to human immortality. No more aging. No more dying of old age. You could live forever. Sounds like the greatest thing that ever happened to humanity, right? But here's the question that should stop you cold. If living forever is so great, why hasn't evolution already figured this out? Evolution has had 4 billion years to work on this problem. 4 billion years of trial and error, mutation and selection, survival and death. And yet, here we are. Still aging. Still dying. Every single one of us. Your great-grandparents died. Your grandparents died or will die. Your parents will die. You will die. And evolution just let that happen. Why? Was it too hard? Was evolution not smart enough? Or, and this is the part that should genuinely unsettle you, what if evolution never wanted us to be immortal in the first place? What if death isn't a bug in the system? What if death is the feature? Welcome to History TimeRift, where we dig into the deepest questions about life, science, and what it means to be human. Today we're going to take one of the most profound journeys you can take into the biology, the physics, the evolutionary logic, and the philosophical mystery of why you are built to die. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you will never think about your own life or your own death the same way again. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and give this video a like, because what we're about to explore together is genuinely one of the most fascinating stories in all of science, and you don't want to miss a single second of it. Let's start at the very beginning, because to understand why evolution never made us immortal, we first need to understand what evolution actually is and what it actually cares about. And here's the first big revelation that trips most people up: evolution doesn't care about you. Not even a little bit. Evolution has no goals, no feelings, no preferences. It's not trying to make you healthy, happy, or long-lived. Evolution is just a process. A blind, mechanical, ruthless process that has one outcome: whatever survives and reproduces, passes on its genes. That's it. That's the whole game. Genes that help an organism survive long enough to reproduce get passed on. Genes that don't, disappear. So the question we should really be asking isn't why didn't evolution make us immortal? The real question is, would immortality even help us pass on our genes? And the answer, staggeringly, is no. Not really. And that single insight is the key that unlocks everything else we're going to talk about today. Think about it this way. Imagine you're a small furry mammal living on the African savanna about 60 million years ago. You spend your days looking for food, avoiding predators, and trying to find a mate. Your average life expectancy, if a lion or a hawk doesn't get you first, is maybe 3 to 5 years. Now imagine a genetic mutation occurs in your DNA, a mutation that, if it worked perfectly, could allow your body to repair itself indefinitely. No more aging. No more cellular breakdown. You could theoretically live forever. Sounds amazing, right? But here's the problem. You live in a world full of lions, and hawks, and disease, and drought, and 1,000 other things that want to kill you that have nothing to do with aging. The statistical reality is that even if you never aged, your chances of surviving past 10 years are almost zero. The world is just too dangerous. So what does evolution do with that immortality mutation? It basically ignores it. Because that mutation doesn't actually improve your reproductive success in any meaningful way. You're still going to get eaten. You're still going to die young. The mutation spreads only if it gives you a survival advantage in the real world, not in some theoretical perfect scenario. And this is the foundational principle behind one of the most important theories in all of evolutionary biology, the theory of the disposable soma. The disposable soma theory was proposed by the brilliant British biologist Thomas Kirkwood back in 1977, and it remains one of the most elegant and compelling explanations for why we age and die. The word soma just means body, from the Greek. And the theory basically says this: your body is disposable. Your genes are not. From evolution's perspective, your body is just a vehicle for your genes. A temporary container. A rental car, not a purchase. And like any good car rental company, Evolution doesn't want to spend too much money maintaining a vehicle it's just going to get back in a few years anyway. The real investment is in the genes themselves, specifically in reproduction. So here's the trade-off that Kirkwood identified. Maintaining a body perfectly, repairing every bit of DNA damage, fixing every broken protein, replacing every damaged cell takes an enormous amount of energy. Energy is the most precious resource in nature. Every calorie spent on body maintenance is a calorie that can't be spent on reproduction, on growing, on finding food, on escaping predators. And in a dangerous world where most animals die young from external causes anyway, the math just doesn't work out in favor of perfect maintenance. Why invest everything in keeping your body alive for 100 years when a tiger might kill you next Tuesday? Instead, Evolution invests just enough in body maintenance to keep you alive and reproductive during your prime years. And then, after that, it basically stops caring. The body slowly falls apart. And that falling apart is what we call aging. This is why aging isn't just random decay. It's actually a reflection of the environment your ancestors lived in. Animals that face a lot of predation and external danger tend to age fast and die young, because there was never evolutionary pressure to build better repair mechanisms. Why build a body that lasts 50 years when nothing in your species ever survived past 5? But animals that are protected from predators, animals that live on islands, animals that can fly, animals with shells tend to live much longer, because in their world, individuals actually do survive long enough for aging to matter. And so evolution, over thousands of generations, gradually invests more in body maintenance for those species. This is why birds live so much longer than you'd expect for their size. A wild pigeon can live 15 years. A parrot can live 60, 70, sometimes over 100 years. A similar-sized mammal like a rat lives maybe 3 years. The bird's body, because birds have historically been able to escape many ground predators through flight, has had more evolutionary pressure to maintain itself longer. The math shifted. And so the biology shifted with it. Now let's go even deeper, because we need to talk about what aging actually is at the cellular and molecular level, because this is where things get truly mind-bending. Your body is made of roughly 37 trillion cells. Every single day, billions of those cells are dividing, copying themselves, replacing old worn-out cells. And every single time a cell divides, it has to copy its entire DNA, about 3 billion base pairs of genetic code. The cellular machinery that does this copying is extraordinarily good, but it's not perfect. Mistakes happen. Maybe one mistake per billion base pairs copied. That sounds incredibly accurate, but multiply that by how many cell divisions happen in your body over a lifetime, and you're looking at an absolutely staggering number of DNA errors accumulating over time. And DNA errors mean broken proteins. Broken proteins mean broken cellular machinery. Broken cellular machinery means cells that function worse and worse over time. That is the molecular engine of aging. But it gets even more interesting. Back in the 1960s, a scientist named Leonard Hayflick made a discovery that shook the biology world. He found that human cells don't divide forever. They divide a certain number of times, roughly 40 to 60 times, and then they just stop. They enter a state called senescence. They don't die, but they don't properly function either. And they start secreting inflammatory signals that damage the tissue around them. This limit on cell division became known as the Hayflick limit, and the mechanism behind it turned out to be one of the most beautiful pieces of molecular biology ever discovered: the telomere. At the end of every one of your chromosomes, there is a protective cap made of repetitive DNA sequences. These caps are called telomeres. Think of them like the plastic tips on the end of a shoelace. Every time your cell divides, those tips get a little bit shorter. And when they get too short, the cell can no longer safely divide. It hits the Hayflick limit. It senesces. And over time, as more and more of your cells accumulate short telomeres and enter senescence, your tissues start to break down. Your organs become less efficient. Your immune system weakens. Your skin loses elasticity. Your brain loses some of its sharpness. This is aging, happening at the molecular level, one cell division at a time. Now here's the fascinating question: why don't cells just repair their telomeres every time they divide? There actually is an enzyme that can do exactly that. It's called telomerase, and it rebuilds telomere caps after cell division. So why don't all your cells produce lots of telomerase and just keep dividing forever? And the answer brings us back to evolution, and to one of the most important trade-offs in all of biology: the trade-off between aging and cancer. You see, cells that can divide without limit are essentially immortal. And we have a name for immortal cells that divide without limit: we call them cancer. Cancer is, in a horrifying way, the closest thing biology has ever produced to cellular immortality. Cancer cells activate telomerase. They ignore the normal signals that tell cells to stop dividing. They just keep going and going, consuming resources, invading tissues, ultimately killing the organism. So evolution faces a brutal dilemma. If cells are given the ability to divide indefinitely, if telomerase is always active, you get cancer. If cells are given strict limits on division, if telomeres shorten and senescence sets in, you get aging. And evolution, across hundreds of millions of years, essentially chose aging over cancer as the lesser of two evils. Because cancer kills you fast and before you reproduce. Aging, at least, tends to kill you after your reproductive years are over. It's a terrible choice, but from evolution's cold, gene-centric perspective, it was the rational one. But wait, there's another layer to this that most people never hear about, and it's one of the most counterintuitive ideas in all of evolutionary biology. It's called antagonistic pleiotropy. It was first proposed by the legendary evolutionary biologist George Williams in 1957, and it suggests something genuinely disturbing: that some of the genes responsible for making you strong, healthy, and reproductively successful when you're young might be the very same genes that cause you to deteriorate and die when you're old. In other words, evolution may have actually selected for genes that help you in youth, even though those same genes harm you in old age, because the reproductive benefits early in life outweigh the costs late in life. A gene that gives a 20-year-old greater bone density and muscle strength, making them more attractive to mates and better able to survive, might also cause arterial calcification at age 60. Evolution doesn't care about the 60-year-old version of you. The 20-year-old version of you has already passed on those genes. The damage done in old age is, from evolution's perspective, irrelevant. And so these genes persist. Generation after generation. Building us up in our prime and then, quietly, tearing us down afterward. This is one reason why aging is so difficult to treat. It's not just simple wear and tear. Some of it is actually baked into your genome by millions of years of natural selection, because those same destructive processes were once beneficial to your ancestors when it mattered most. Let's pause here and think about the bigger picture for a moment, because what we've been discussing has some truly staggering implications. The picture that emerges from all of this science is that you are not designed to last. You are designed to reproduce. You are, from an evolutionary standpoint, a delivery mechanism for genetic information. Your body is infrastructure built to function well enough for long enough to pass on the genes inside it, and then infrastructure that evolution has absolutely no incentive to maintain past that point. There's something both humbling and oddly liberating about that realization. The universe didn't build you to be eternal. It built you to be effective. Briefly, brilliantly, powerfully effective. And then it recycled you to make room for the next generation. And speaking of the next generation, here's one of the most profound evolutionary reasons why death might actually be necessary, not just for individuals, but for species. Imagine a world where nothing died. Where every individual organism just kept living, indefinitely, accumulating resources, taking up space, consuming food, competing with younger individuals. New genetic mutations would arise in the population, but the old individuals would still be there, taking up all the ecological niches, leaving little room for new variants to establish themselves. In a population where nothing dies, evolution itself would essentially stall. Because evolution works through generations. New mutations need new individuals to try them out. Old individuals need to die to make room for new experiments. Death is the engine of evolutionary innovation. Without death, there is no natural selection. Without natural selection, there is no adaptation. Without adaptation, there is no survival in a changing world. Death, in this deep sense, is not the enemy of life. Death is what makes complex life possible at all. This idea connects to something even more ancient and fundamental. Way back in the early days of life on Earth, when the only living things were single-celled organisms, those organisms were essentially immortal. A bacterium divides in two, and both daughter cells are new. There's no individual that ages and dies. The lineage is continuous. Potentially infinite. But here's the thing, those organisms are also extraordinarily limited in what they can become. They can evolve, yes, but only slowly, and they can never become truly complex multicellular organisms without solving a problem that immortal single cells never had to solve: the problem of cooperation. For cells to cooperate and build a complex body together, some of them have to give up their individual immortality. They have to commit to a role: skin cell, liver cell, neuron, and eventually die without reproducing. The cells in your body that are not reproductive cells have, in a very real sense, sacrificed their immortality so that you as an organism can exist. And your body as a whole will eventually sacrifice its existence so that the genetic lineage can continue. Death is the price of complexity. And complexity is the price of being you. Now let's talk about some of the most remarkable exceptions in nature, because they exist, and they're absolutely worth knowing about, because they tell us something profound about the flexibility of the evolutionary constraints we've been discussing. Consider the naked mole rat. This bizarre, nearly hairless, buck-toothed little creature lives underground in large colonies in East Africa, and it is one of the most scientifically extraordinary animals on the planet. A mouse of similar size lives maybe 2 to 3 years. A naked mole rat can live over 30 years. 30 years for a rodent is almost incomprehensible. And not only do they live that long, but they show almost no signs of conventional aging. Their cancer rates are extraordinarily low. Their reproductive capacity is maintained almost until death. They are, by every biological measure, aging far more slowly than they should for an animal their size. Why? Because they live underground, in burrows, protected from most predators, in a highly cooperative social structure, and in an environment with very low oxygen conditions that have created very different evolutionary pressures than those faced by surface-dwelling rodents. The evolutionary math shifted. And the biology followed. Or consider the Greenland shark. This slow-moving, deep-water predator of the North Atlantic is the longest-lived vertebrate known to science. Some individuals are estimated to be over 500 years old. 500 years old. They grow incredibly slowly, just a centimeter or 2 per year. They reach sexual maturity at around 150 years of age. In the cold, dark, deep waters of the North Atlantic, where food is scarce and activity levels are minimal, the evolutionary pressures that push toward rapid aging and early reproduction are simply not present. And so evolution, incrementally, over millions of years, has produced an animal that lives on timescales we can barely comprehend. Then there is the strange case of the immortal jellyfish, Turritopsis dohrnii, a tiny marine organism that has genuinely captured the imagination of biologists worldwide. Under stress or injury, this jellyfish can revert its cells back to their earliest developmental state, a process called transdifferentiation, and begin its life cycle again from the beginning. It is, in a very limited biological sense, capable of biological immortality. But even here, the reality is more complicated than the headlines suggest. The jellyfish still dies from predation, disease, and environmental stress. Its individual cells may reset, but the organism is still thoroughly mortal in practice. Evolution gave it an extraordinary trick, but not a free pass from the world. And then there's the hydra. This tiny freshwater organism, so small you need a magnifying glass to see it clearly, appears to show no signs of aging whatsoever in controlled laboratory conditions. It maintains a constantly renewable stem cell population, and studies have found that its mortality rate does not increase with age. It just lives, and lives, and lives, until something kills it from the outside. Researchers studying hydras in laboratory settings have had individual animals survive for decades with no observable deterioration. And why does the hydra get this gift when we don't? Because the Hydra is a simple organism with a simple body plan, maintained by continuously renewing stem cells, living in a relatively protected environment, with a very different evolutionary history than ours. What all of these examples tell us is something profound and hopeful: that aging is not an absolute law of nature. It's not like gravity, which applies universally and without exception. Aging is a biological strategy. It's the evolutionary solution that made the most sense given a particular set of environmental pressures and constraints. And when those pressures change, as they have for the naked mole rat, the Greenland shark, and the Hydra, the strategy changes with them. Which naturally raises the question: what about us? What about humans? We are, after all, one of the longest-lived mammal species on the planet relative to our body size. A chimpanzee, our closest living relative, lives maybe 40 to 50 years in the wild. We routinely live 70, 80, 90 years. Some of us live past 100. Why? What happened in our evolutionary history that extended human lifespan so far beyond what you'd expect for a primate of our size? The answer is almost certainly connected to our extraordinary brains and our social intelligence. The evolutionary theory of why humans live so long compared to other primates is actually quite compelling. It begins with the grandmother hypothesis, proposed by anthropologist Kristen Hawkes in the 1990s. Hawkes observed that among traditional hunter-gatherer societies, grandmothers play an enormous role in the survival of their grandchildren. They gather food, provide childcare, transfer knowledge about plants, animals, seasonal patterns, and survival strategies that take decades to accumulate. A grandmother who lives to 60 or 70 and uses that time to help her grandchildren survive is passing on her genes indirectly through those grandchildren. So evolution, in humans, found a surprising new reason to extend lifespan past reproduction. Post-reproductive individuals, especially women, were providing such tremendous survival advantages to their genetic relatives that longer lives became evolutionarily valuable. This is an extraordinary insight. It means that human longevity is, at least in part, a product of our social nature. We live longer because we learn to help each other. We live longer because knowledge matters. We live longer because being part of a community with experienced elders turns out to be a massive survival advantage. In a very real sense, grandmothers are one of the reasons humanity is what it is today. But here's where the story takes its most modern and exciting turn. Because for the first time in the history of life on Earth, a species is actually doing what evolution never could: deliberately, intelligently, scientifically working to extend its own lifespan. Right now, in laboratories around the world, researchers are pursuing some of the most audacious biological experiments ever attempted. Some are targeting senescent cells, those zombie cells that accumulate as we age and pump out inflammatory signals that damage surrounding tissue. A class of drugs called senolytics has shown remarkable results in animal studies, clearing out these damaged cells and in some cases extending healthy lifespan in mice by 20 to 30%. Some researchers are working with a gene called FOXO3, which has been strongly associated with longevity in humans. People who carry certain variants of this gene are significantly more likely to live past 90 or 100. Understanding exactly how this gene works could unlock entirely new strategies for extending healthy human life. Others are focused on the cellular energy factories known as mitochondria, which become progressively dysfunctional as we age and are thought to be a major driver of the aging process. Some of the most exciting longevity research involves compounds like NAD+ precursors, which appear to support mitochondrial function and have shown promising results in extending healthy lifespan in model organisms. And then there's the absolutely breathtaking field of epigenetic reprogramming. Your DNA contains within it the full instruction manual for building every cell in your body. But which instructions are followed in any given cell is controlled by the epigenome, a layer of chemical marks on and around your DNA that tell the cell which genes to turn on and which to turn off. As we age, these epigenetic marks become increasingly disordered. Skin cells start expressing genes they shouldn't. Neurons lose some of the precise epigenetic control that keeps them functioning at their best. This epigenetic drift is now believed to be one of the central clocks of aging. And here's the astonishing part: some researchers believe it may be reversible. Nobel Prize-winning scientist Shinya Yamanaka discovered a set of transcription factors that, when activated, can reset a cell's epigenome back to a youthful state, essentially turning back the biological clock of individual cells. Early experiments using partial versions of this reprogramming in mice have produced stunning results, older mice showing improvement in vision, organ function, and various markers of biological age. The implications, if this technology can be safely applied to humans, are almost too large to fully comprehend. And yet, here at History TimeRift, we believe in being not just excited, but honest. Because there are real and serious reasons why the quest for human immortality is not just scientifically challenging but possibly philosophically complicated in ways that go far deeper than the laboratory. Let's think about what immortality would actually mean. Not just for individuals, but for society. If people stop dying of old age, populations don't stop growing. They keep growing. Indefinitely. The resources of the planet, food, water, land, energy, are finite. An immortal humanity would face resource pressures on a scale that is difficult to even calculate. And what about social mobility? What about the concentration of power? In a world where Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk could live for 500 years, accumulating wealth and influence for half a millennium, what happens to everyone else? What happens to the natural turnover of ideas, of leadership, of innovation that comes when old generations step aside and new ones take over? There's a reason that many evolutionary biologists, philosophers, and even some longevity researchers themselves argue that the goal shouldn't necessarily be immortality but rather what they call compressed morbidity. The idea isn't to live forever. The idea is to live fully healthy for a very long time and then to decline and die quickly, rather than spending decades in slow deterioration. To live well, deeply, and completely and then to go. Because there's something else that the science of death and aging reveals, something that cuts to the very heart of what it means to be human. And this meaning is inseparable from mortality. Think about the things that matter most to you in your life. Your relationships. Your goals. The experiences you treasure. Would any of them feel the same if you had infinite time? Would you cherish a sunset if you were going to see 10 billion of them? Would you value your friendships if they were eternal obligations rather than finite gifts? Philosophers from Epicurus to Heidegger have argued that it is precisely our mortality, our awareness that our time is limited, that gives human life its intensity, its urgency, and its meaning. The Japanese concept of mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of impermanence, has been central to Japanese aesthetics and philosophy for centuries. The idea that things are beautiful because they don't last. Cherry blossoms are precious because they bloom for only a week. A human life is precious because it ends. Strip away mortality and you may not get a richer human experience. You may get a stranger, flatter, less urgent one. None of this means we shouldn't try to extend healthy human life. Reducing suffering, eliminating preventable disease, helping people remain vigorous and capable and connected well into old age, these are profoundly good goals, and the science that pursues them deserves every bit of support we can give it. But the deepest lesson that evolutionary biology teaches us about aging and death is not that we are broken, or that nature made a terrible mistake. The lesson is that we are exactly what 4 billion years of life's history produced: organisms that are built to be brief and brilliant, to burn brightly, to reproduce and connect and create and die, making room for what comes next. Evolution never made us immortal, not because it failed, but because in a very real sense, mortality is the engine that made us possible. You are the product of an unbroken chain of survival stretching back to the very first living cell on this planet. Every single one of your ancestors, going back billions of years, survived long enough to reproduce. Every single one of them died. And their deaths, each and every one, were not failures. They were contributions. Each death made room for a new experiment, a new variation, a new possibility. Your existence, right now, reading these words, breathing this air, thinking these thoughts, is the most recent chapter in the greatest story ever told. And someday, your chapter will end, and new chapters will begin. That's not a tragedy. That's the story. That's always been the story. We hope this journey through the science and philosophy of aging and mortality has given you something genuinely worth thinking about. This is exactly the kind of deep, fascinating exploration we live for here at History TimeRift. If you found this video valuable, if it made you think, made you question, made you see your own life a little differently, please share it with someone you think would appreciate it. And we would genuinely love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think humans should pursue immortality? Do you think death gives life meaning, or do you think that's just something mortals tell themselves to feel better? Drop your answer in the comments below. We read every single one, and the conversations that happen there are honestly some of the most interesting discussions on this entire platform. Hit the like button if this video was worth your time, and make sure you're subscribed to History TimeRift so you never miss the next deep dive. Because there are stories in science, history, and the human experience that will blow your mind, and we are just getting started.